This week, plans for a Brightline station in Cocoa move forward, but how does the future of Orlando to Miami passenger rail look? The Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission proposes a new budget, with SunRail operations set to transfer to local governments next year. Plus, micromobility devices and how e-bikes and scooters should be regulated. This is Talking Central Florida. Hello, I'm Steve Mort, and welcome to the show where we take a closer look at the news in your region and community. I'm joined in the studio this week by two of the best. First, she's a morning anchor at WFTV Channel 9 and a reporter covering traffic and transportation issues in Central Florida. She recently rode in a driverless taxi and is here to talk about it. So, Alexa Lorenzo, how are you doing, Alexa?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good to see you. And a reporter for the news collaborative partner WKMG News 6. She covers stories around Central Florida with a focus on all things Osceola County, including recently some important transportation stories. It's Stephanie Rodriguez. Good to see you, Stephanie.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for being here, guys. Let's get into it then. First, a proposed Brightline stop in Cocoa is gaining momentum, with local leaders pushing for federal funding to help make it a reality. Cocoa and Brevard County leaders are seeking tens of millions of dollars for the station. Supporters say it could bring new economic activity to the area by expanding access to passenger rail, but questions remain about funding, timing, and Brightline's future. So why is this federal funding for a Brightline station, Alexa, in Cocoa so critical to getting it done?
The station is going to be expensive. It has a $75 million price tag, and right now they need federal funding of about $57 million, so nearly $60 million to get this done. The city of Cocoa has committed $5 million to the project. There are a few other funding partners: Brevard County, the Space Coast Office of Tourism, and Space Coast Transportation and Planning Organization, the TPO, but they just don't have the dollars behind them for $75 million. Everyone understands the economic impact that they could see from this Brightline station. And if you've ridden on Brightline from Orlando to Miami, you just pass an incredible stop right there in Brevard County. And if you want to go there, you're turning around in a car or some other, carpool bus system, whatever it may be. It would be a tremendous impact to the area, but it would also have a very high price tag.
I mean, especially now as we're seeing these Artemis missions, very timely. People might want to go out on the train to see those. You've got the cruise port there. There's a lot of reasons that people might want to visit that area by train.
And leaders are estimating 400,000 people to go see the Artemis launch. So could you imagine a launch of that magnitude with a Brightline station, what you would see tourism-wise?
Yeah, of course, we record this show on Tuesday, so of course that might happen by the time this airs. WKMG News 6 has covered this. What happens, though, if that funding doesn't come through?
Their hands are really tied without the money. I know Alexa, encapsulated it perfectly. There's so much money that they need for this Brightline rail service to head to Cocoa, to Brevard County. Again, we mentioned Kennedy Space Center, Port Canaveral. There's so many reasons for it to be there, but they need the money. Our Cocoa community correspondent, James Sparvero, was out there recently covering this story, and he found out that Cocoa actually had to reapply for the grant money, a major chunk of it that they're asking for, because the last time that they did it, there was a different administration in Washington. So that was a whole process that they had to go through again. But they are hopeful that they could get the money in the next several months, and if that's a possibility, and if they can get the money secured by the summer and construction started, in theory, it would open by 2029.
I mean, so many of, and you're right, I mean, so many of these things are kind of out of their hands, right, including which administration is in Washington. I mean, you sort of referred to it just now, the ROI on this, I guess, Alexa, right? Supporters of it say major economic benefits potentially from having a station here. What have been the reports in terms of sort of potential jobs and tax revenues, business activity? We talked about a couple of them just there.
Supporters call this a transformational project. They're anticipating a boost in jobs, tax income, and activity overall for businesses. Think going out to eat, shopping in Cocoa Village. But putting numbers on it, they estimate that this could have a huge economic impact, anywhere from $120 million annually to $350 million. That is significant.
Yeah, for Brevard,
and for that, you need jobs as well. They anticipate about 1,200 to more than 3,000 jobs could be generated from this as well.
As a result of that. That's pretty remarkable. I mean, your colleague, WFTV, Nick Papantonis, right, he's kind of dug in depth into the importance of this project, not just for the Space Coast, as we've been talking about, but also for Brightline itself. And there have been, and you and I have talked about this in the past, there have been questions about its financial future and how it's doing. Where do things stand, do we know at the moment from his reporting, and what could it mean for this project in particular? Do we know?
This was a big topic of conversation in our morning meeting when we were parceling out the stories of the day and understanding that Nick was going to cover this, because it was, where does Brightline stand with this? Where does Brightline stand without this? And they're anticipating that this Brightline station could add about 450,000 annual riders to and from the Cocoa station. Wow. About 350,000 are the full Orlando route, correct? So just take about 100,000 out. That would give them about a needed 13% boost in annual ridership. And at this point, yes, they are seeing an increase in passenger counts and ticket revenue. That is all trending upward, but all the rate analysis that we've reviewed show that they need more boosts to be a viable operation. Analysts downgraded the credit ratings again in the most recent update, which was March. They said it was likely certain that the company would default on some of its obligations to investors by September.
And Brightline has been sort of tinkering around with its fares, trying to, on the South Florida stretch and the Orlando to Miami stretch. That Orlando to Miami stretch, that seems to be their big cash cow at the moment. That's where the profit is.
That's where their long-term ridership is, of course, but they've also adjusted that Miami to West Palm Beach ride as well, because they can't ignore those South Florida commuters who maybe do business in one, live in the other, have family, etc. So they're really zooming on out and saying, how can we make this more profitable or more viable?
I mean, more immediately, Brightline has sort of gotten a boost, right, in recent weeks, Stephanie. We've seen this rise in gas prices. Also, airport travel, I guess, has taken a hit with those long TSA lines, although that could be abating now with the TSA agents getting paid. What has News 6 found in terms of what that's meant for rail travel?
Yeah, just recently, March, obviously, spring break, and then couple that with the long lines at TSA that we have been seeing. As you mentioned, now we might see that lowered a little bit, but we talked to the Brightline CEO, and he said that there was a weekend in March, I believe the weekend after the spring break here in Central Florida, where they saw record numbers of travelers, over 40,000 people choosing to get on Brightline trains. And so they're seeing good numbers right now. Of course, can they take that into the future? That's when you see gas prices, come into play. If someone wants to go to Miami, they think, well, I have to fill up my tank to and from Miami, and then I have to deal with traffic, which will also lower my gas tank. And then I might not get there in the promised 3.5 hours. I might get there in 5 hours. And, there's some attractiveness to rail travel when it comes to gas prices, because you don't have to pay that. You don't have to sit in traffic. You can multitask on the train, which you can't do and you shouldn't do when you're in a car. And we're hearing that from passengers. They're like, I can hop on, read a book. And then when you compare it to air travel, if there is a long line at TSA, you have to make it to your gate to be able to board. If you're stuck in TSA lines, as much as you prepare, if there's something outside of your, grasp that you can't control, even if you're there 3 hours early, we saw people in Atlanta waiting 6 hours for TSA security. So there's just so many factors. Yeah, you'll get to Miami faster on the plane if you get on it. So there's attractiveness, and then of course competitive fares. If they're, we saw that they're changing some of their prices for their fares, and then they're offering discounts. They're really trying to get people to get on their trains. That is.
Well, as I was driving in here today, gas was around $4.30, $4.40 thereabouts. So it's ticking up, and as we know, gas prices go up quickly, but they don't necessarily come down quickly. So maybe that'll be a boost for Brightline in the longer term as well. The other rail operator experiencing big changes, of course, is SunRail. SunRail operations are set to switch from the state to local governments by the end of 2027. It follows a recent Orlando Economic Partnership poll showing strong public support for a proposed Sunshine Corridor shared with Brightline that could see SunRail connect to the airport and theme parks. Nearly 80% of those surveyed said they would likely ride SunRail if that happened. We'll put a link to that survey in the show notes. Well, the Central Florida Commuter Rail Commission just formally proposed its 26-27 budget. Includes more than $74 million from local governments and around $35 million from the state. You reported recently, Stephanie, on how this handover will work next year. What can we expect? What do we know?
So the ownership will go from FDOT to the 4 counties that SunRail runs through, and then the city of Orlando. So we're talking Volusia, Seminole, Orange, and Osceola County, and of course the city of Orlando. And as you mentioned, the Commuter Rail Commission just passed their final budget under FDOT. So that's the question. once the state is not doesn't have his hands in SunRail, it falls in the hands of the local entities to pay for all of it. They have to pay for whatever the budget is. If they put $75 million, they still have to come up with the $34 million because the price is likely not going to lower for operations for the SunRail. And then you have the Sunshine Corridor or other improvements that people who ride the SunRail want to see. They want to see it on the weekends. They do want to see it go to MCO, to the attractions.
Absolutely.
That all costs money. Sunshine Corridor, $4 billion. Can they even make that improvement? Where's that money coming from? Are they going to increase fares? Are they going to each have to allocate more money? And with the change, I forgot to mention, each of the counties and the city of Orlando will pay their share based on ridership.
Yeah, a lot of local governments are looking at their budgets in all kinds of ways at the moment. So this is certainly a big number. There is a study going on right now, I think, Alexa, funded by local governments and agencies, PD&E study, right? That seems to be key to advancing the Sunshine Corridor concept. Why is that needed for those who are sort of unfamiliar? And do we know how long it might take? All of this seems to be a very long-term proposition.
Yes, you got to zoom out and look at the long road ahead. Yeah. It essentially lays the technical and legal groundwork for the Sunshine Corridor. So that's looking at feasibility. Is this even possible? What is it going to cost us to build this, to run it, the environmental impacts, and all that is needed to potentially qualify. This is bringing it back now to our Brevard County Station conversation for federal funding. Without this study, they can't apply for that federal money. So this is all a must do before they break ground. So we are potentially about halfway through the study. When the study began, we were told it could take 2 years. We're about to hit that 1 year mark in April. So at this point, this conversation makes me want to check back in with the Florida Department of Transportation and say, where are we right now? But it is about that halfway mark, I would assume, from our coverage in this. But overall, early stages, and it'll be years until we actually see any sort of construction.
Of course, the federal government, regardless of which administration it is, needs to see that local money flowing in before it's going to commit dollars. Before we move on, I wanted to get into some more details on a story we covered here recently on the show, and that is traffic in Osceola County. There's a lot of it, for sure. We talked about the Southern Beltway project by the Central Florida Expressway Authority. In particular, a part of it aimed at reducing congestion on Narcoossee Road by building an extension to the Osceola Parkway to be named State Road 534. Construction is set to begin on 534 this year, right, Alexa? I mean, you've really gotten into kind of the details about how this is going to sort of play out. What is the TikTok here, the sort of play-by-play? What's it going to mean for drivers?
Yeah, we could see construction starting on phase 1 of the project. So the first phase is the 5 miles connecting the 417 to Narcoossee, and that's going to include new interchanges, an extension of Simpson Road to improve access points. But that's just one phase of a much bigger project, the 3-phase project. The entirety is about 14 miles. It's a toll road, again, built in those 3 phases, and it'll stretch from Orlando International Airport down to Nova Road in Osceola County. And the goal is we need another option. Narcoossee just cannot handle the traffic. And we've looked into some of the data points showing the explosive growth the area has seen. And depending on the time of day you go, morning, afternoon, it can be gridlock. I spoke with some traffic leaders who tried to tinker with signal timing to see if that helped. Yeah. It maybe helped 10 seconds. I believe southbound, and then northbound it ended up hurting. So they've been trying different options that are far less costly. But this seems to be the only option. This is likely something you've heard about because one of the phases does cut through Split Oak Forest, which has been a big topic of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that Narcoossee traffic in Osceola in particular has increased, nearly 50% between 22 and 24 with as Alexa mentioned. That
by the time this show airs, it'll increase 60%.
Yeah, we record this on a Tuesday,
yes,
so
Thursday,
by the time it airs
63.
yeah, exactly. That rapid development that Alexa mentioned there really plays a role in that. And just to the south, in St. Cloud, there's another road that planners have got their eye on.
Yeah, Canoe Creek Road. I've been there. I've done stories there, and it's a 2-lane road right now, and it is bad right now. And it is also expected to double in traffic by 2050, so there's still some time. So the county is really trying to get out ahead of it and also fix the problems that they have right now, because there is a lot of development happening there. So what they've approved their commissioners is taking it from 2 lanes to 4, about 4.5 miles of it. So that'll be from Deer Run Road to 192. And they're planning to apply for a $25 million federal grant to cover some of the costs, because as we've spoken about, it is not cheap to do something like this. And, they really need it there, and they're planning for future developments. And it's not the only place that Osceola County is trying to improve and get out ahead of traffic or deal with traffic that they already have. Just earlier this week, they expanded West Side Boulevard in one of the fastest growing areas in Central Florida.
Four Corners.
Four Corners, yeah. If you've been there, you know. So West Side Boulevard was strange in the fact that it had 2 dead ends. So there was 2 existing segments, and then there was a middle portion that just was dirt, was nothing. So what they've done, and it cost them $11 million to do, less than a mile. They've made it 4 lanes. And now both of the roads connect, which means there'll be more access for people who live in the area. They don't have to go around this way, around that way. They can get to 27 Ronald Reagan Parkway. There's, expectations that it'll lower congestion there and lower congestion on those major roadways. If you've been on 27, you know what I'm talking about. So, like I said, I want to mention $11 million for less than a mile. District 1 Commissioner, she told me it's about $14 million for 1 mile. So that just shows the investment that's needed to improve the infrastructure. And more development is coming there, by the way, because they made that road with, an only turn lane that doesn't go to anything. Development is coming.
I mean, people talk about the expense of public transit, but roads are expensive too. And as Osceola County reporter, my guess is that growth and transportation are going to be a bigger and bigger part of your beat.
Oh my gosh,
for sure, as we go forward. Well, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be chatting about many of these issues here on the show with the Executive Director of Metro Plan Orlando, Gary Hupman. Meantime, we'll put links up to the reporting we referenced from WFTV Channel 9 and WKMG News 6 in the show notes. Be sure to like and subscribe to Talking Central Florida. You can listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and watch on YouTube at Talking Central Florida. Seems like everywhere you look these days there are e-bikes and scooters zipping around. Well, it also seems that every local government is trying to figure out what to do about them. The Florida legislature just passed a bill containing a suite of restrictions on so-called micromobility devices, including a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit on sidewalks. It also wants a new task force to recommend new public safety laws governing their use. So what are local governments doing? Stephanie, you're the person to ask about this. You just recently covered one city in Volusia County, right, that's taking steps on e-bikes and scooters. What did you find?
So DeLand just recently added to an ordinance that already existed and banned e-bikes from its downtown sidewalks. I want to provide that context because before they added e-bikes to it, so regular bicycles, skateboards, and scooters were already banned from the downtown sidewalks. So they had to go in and change the ordinance to add e-bikes, because people have been riding their e-bikes on the sidewalk, and they say, well, the ordinance, I can ride my e-bike. It
just said scooters,
It just says scooters and regular bikes. Yeah. So they made sure that they went in and added that because, it's a pedestrian-heavy downtown. There's a lot of shops and restaurants. I spoke to a restaurant owner who said he's really happy to hear that they're going to be adding that to the restriction because he walks downtown, he has customers who eat outside, e-bikes, they go fast, they're silent, and, people are on them. They also approved it so that anyone under 18 has to wear a helmet when they're on the e-bikes. Of course, we're seeing local governments trying to tackle an issue that didn't exist before. So lots of changes when it comes to e-bikes. Yeah,
and enforcement, of course, is a question. Channel 9 has also looked into how this is playing out at the local level as well.
Yeah, we are actually waiting right now for Orange County to revisit this issue and look at some of the proposals. In December, they talking about those new safety requirements. What can they do for e-bikes and e-scooters? And they were all in agreement. There are concerns here that need to be addressed, but it's hard. Yeah. They are not going to be able to outright ban these in Orange County. It's just not very likely. So they need to figure out how are they going to regulate it. And we are seeing some of those proposals come to the forefront once again in some upcoming board meetings this spring, and we did also see a zero tolerance policy enacted in Cocoa Beach. So we're talking Brevard County, we're talking Volusia County,
Yes.
we're talking Orange County, and also school boards having this conversation, because if you go to a school campus right now, a middle school especially rather, the majority of them are arriving on those micromobility devices.
I mean, I remember covering this issue some years ago in San Jose, California, actually, which has sort of embraced scooters and e-bikes pretty early on. I mean, the problem for those coming up with regulations, you mentioned this here, is that tech companies have invested in this technology heavily. Governments often see it as an important transportation solution in some places. And as you suggest, Alexa, these devices don't seem to be going away anytime soon, despite all these problems.
Right. It's how do we regulate but not eliminate these devices? And a lot of the governments talk about how this helps that last mile. Think about, I'm going to take you to the Brightline station down in Miami. You get to Miami and let's go have lunch 3/4 mile away. Let's hop on a little mobility scooter. It's different here because
too far to walk.
Correct. It's different here with our Brightline station because it's at the airport. But you think, fine, a SunRail station in Osceola County. You want to get a little farther. How can you do that? Hop on one of these devices that have contracts with the city of Orlando, etc., to get you to that last mile of your journey. It's also a pretty cheap cost when you look at charging them annually. To charge these devices, it's about $50 if you have your own, that is. So it is an option that a lot of people rely on. So again, it's that they ain't going anywhere.
Yeah. There's even a question, right, about how these e-bikes, kind of fit into the broader cycling infrastructure. You kind of mentioned this was the case in DeLand. Winter Garden, right, in Orange County recently passed restrictions, including for users on the West Orange Trail, which is already a popular biking trail. What steps did the commission take there?
So popular. I mean, we're out there. You see bikes, you see people jogging, you see people running, taking their dogs for a walk. So the ordinance that they passed restricts the kinds of e-bikes that can be on the trail. And that's another conversation that local governments are happening because, some of them can get up to, I've heard, up to 50 miles an hour. So what they did over in...
Say that again. 50 miles an hour?
I've heard people, I've interviewed people who own them who said that there's some, I'm sure they're the more expensive versions of them. But so what they did over there in Winter Garden is they made it so, first of all, cyclists there must be at least 15 years old because as she mentioned, you literally cannot go to a school anywhere right now without seeing so many children on these micromobility devices. They have to wear a helmet and then they have to stay at 10 miles per hour or below when they're on the sidewalk or on the bike paths next to the roadways. And when it comes to West Orange Trail, e-bikes that reach 28 miles per hour, they can't be on the trail. And then motorized scooters can't be used on sidewalks that are less than 8 feet wide. And they're going as far as adding a fee for this. So if you're in violation of this ordinance, you're going to be ticketed $100. And of course, if a minor is found in violation, then their parent or legal guardian will have to foot the bill for their, misdeed.
Well, this is everybody trying to come up with these, these regulations. But I mean, how do the micromobility companies themselves talk about these concerns about e-bikes and scooters? I mean, I think they came up with their own set of sort of recommended regulations, right?
Yeah, they sent kind of 10 recommendations, the 10 commandments, I guess you could call them, of e-bike regulations from their minds. There's several companies, they all came together and kind of gave out this list. And most of it had to do with, how cities pick vendors and, their trial program and things like that if they are contracting with the company to bring them there. But they also suggested maybe setting a 15 mile per hour speed limit and then suggesting helmets and not requiring them because they say that there's no correlation between requiring helmets and improved safety concerns. But they didn't mention education. That is a big thing that we're seeing, especially local school districts talk about because the kids are coming to school and a lot of them aren't wearing helmets or they don't know the rules of the road. Osceola School District just partnered with Metro Orlando that's been working on a pilot program for e-bike safety for children and the Osceola County Sheriff's Office, that is, to bring these classes to students because if they don't know the rules of the road, they're more likely to injure themselves or others when they're on these micromobility devices, and they're on them.
I wanted to wrap up by mentioning another potential last mile transportation solution that you covered recently, and that's autonomous ride-hailing services, right, Alexa? One of those is Waymo. It's now accepting passengers, I think, in Orlando. Certainly my app pinged up and said,
mine did as well.
You can now call a ride. We mentioned the start of the trial period here on the show. You've ridden a Waymo. What's it like?
It was easy. It was easy to call it. It was easy to put in the location, similar to an Uber. Hey, I want to go to X. Car comes up.
Yeah.
You on the top, it gives you the numbers, similar to how an Uber or Lyft, you would check the license plate. You get in and buckle up, and you press the button that says start ride, and there it goes. There is a human watching from afar. So if there is an issue, you press a button, but it takes you there. It followed all the traffic laws. So we are seeing it in Central Florida. I will say the service area is different than some thought. Right now, you can't call it from downtown Orlando. You can.
It's on the other side of 4, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And then into the attractions area, but no airport right now. So
What do they say about that there? Are there any plans for that?
there are plans for that, but it takes time to get comfortable with where they are right now, that service area that they have mapped out. They want to get service up to speed there, figure out what the demand is, and hopefully expand the service area to include downtown Orlando, to include the airport. And right now they are taking local roads, but as the vehicles get more comfortable, understand the area more, they will start using the highways.
Do you feel I know that the companies say that it's super safe and safer than human-operated cars, takes that sort of human element out of it, but do you feel safe in it?
I personally did. I will tell you, we were driving in that near downtown Orlando area, so we were not on very busy streets.
Yep.
We were not on Colonial, Cimarron, anything of the sort. So I think my answer may be different if I were given a different route that day. But from what I saw, I did feel safe, and I could see a lot of people using this. They say that pricing would be similar to Uber and Lyft, so what we're already used to. So if you hate conversation, maybe this is for you.
This isn't in Osceola County, though, right?
Not as
Stephanie,
far as I've seen. No, I've only
at this
seen
point.
it so far in Orlando.
Orlando and Miami, yeah. Well, we'll put a link to the bill on micromobility devices, SB 382. That's the bill number in the podcast feed show notes. Alexa Lorenzo from WFTV Channel 9 and Stephanie Rodriguez from WKMG News 6. Thank you guys so much for coming in.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. I just wanted to note we're watching the Artemis 2 mission as well that we mentioned earlier. We'll be talking about the latest on the program next week. A reminder, we record the show on Tuesday morning, so things can happen by the time it airs. Meanwhile, be sure to join us on social media for more discussion on the reporting we're talking about on the show. We're at Talking Central Florida on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Finally, we recently spent some time talking about the elections taking place this year. The News Collaborative of Central Florida will be tracking the elections closely through the work of our collaborative partners who are helping provide in-depth coverage of races happening at the local level throughout our region. Among those outlets is the Osceola News-Gazette. And to talk about the 2026 elections in this county, I sat down with the News-Gazette's editor, Ken Jackson, and we started by talking about the importance of collaboration.
Well, it's something we've never done. And when we got into it last year, I was of the thought that, more resources in Central Florida help us cover these topics more roundly. When we came to doing the election here in 2026, this was a boon for me because in the last election, the 2024 election, the primary, the voter turnout was 17%. That's 1 out of 6 registered voters, and only about 55% of Osceola County residents are registered. Anything that we can do to bring that number up, to me, is going to help our community because we have a lot of very important races that will be in this 2026 election, and specifically in that August primary, which the numbers show voter turnout's very low in Osceola County.
Do you see that as part of your mission?
Absolutely. I'm of the opinion where I have never missed a vote in my life, and in the role that I'm in, I think that helps as a give some perspective. Like for instance, and I'm just giving an example for the school board in the August primary, we're going to have 4 of the 5 seats on the school board up for election. That's 80% of the policy making for a school district that has 73,000 students.
Well, let's talk about that race then. It's one of the key areas that you're going to be following. As you say, 4 out of the 5 school board seats on the ballot. Are those school board races in Osceola drawing a lot of attention as they have in other places? And I wonder what the main issues are there.
Well, as of right now, no, not as compared to, say, city commission races in Osceola County. Of those 4, we have 2 incumbents who are running, and they're the only ones who have filed in their races.
Okay.
And one of the other ones where, in District 1, where Terry Castillo is not running for a 3rd term, a name that'll be familiar to folks in Osceola County, Jay Wheeler, who already served 4 terms back from 2000 to 2016, is running, as well as a local in Celebration, Greg Filak. So as far as issues, right now, the big issue in Osceola County is for parents of special education students. The district has gone to a model where they have potted those students. So they're bringing them, if your child went to a school in Harmony, they're now going to a school in Narcoossee, or they're in a general population classroom. So that's the hot button thing right now.
Presumably they're facing some budget pressures as well, as school districts are around the state.
It's not to the extent that it is in Orange County, where they've agreed to close a handful of schools. But the Superintendent, Dr. Shanoff, did say that they're facing a shortfall in the budget next year, potentially about $20 million.
So they're still experiencing quite a shortfall there. There are, as you mentioned, several city commission seats across the county this year. You're currently working on coverage of the challenges against 2 Kissimmee City Commission incumbents. What are you tracking in those races?
Right. So that'd be seats 2 and 4. Angela Eady and Jeanette Martinez are the incumbents. And generally, maybe that you get 1 or 2 challengers in those races. We're already in the month of March, and these are folks who filed months ago. They've got 3 challengers apiece. I don't know if it's political factions trying to get on the board and get their 3 votes. And then we've got issues right now with the police department as far as staffing with deputies and such. So we've got a lot of voices in those races fighting to be the loudest voice.
The city's placed 2 referendums on the August ballot. It followed, I think, some heated discussions on the city commission that you and I had talked about previously. One measure is on term limits. The other involves background checks for city officials. What should voters know about these proposals, and how are you going about explaining them?
Well, first of all, these are going to be on that August ballot where the county has struggled to get voters to come out. The term limits currently, a city commissioner in Kissimmee can serve 2 full terms, and they must sit out a cycle, which in some cases can just be 2 years, and then they can serve another 8 years. This referendum would change that from 2 terms to 3.
What are the other key races and issues, storylines that you're following closely in Osceola County in the next few months? Well,
we've got 2 county commission races that will be going on as well. Viviana Janer is an incumbent in District 2, which covers Brandon Ventura Lakes and north side of Kissimmee. Now, county commission is the only races in Osceola County outside of constitutionals like the sheriff and supervisor of elections that are partisan. So the Janer is the Democrat, and currently her only opposition comes from a Republican, Olga Gonzalez, the former Kissimmee mayor, who termed out 2 years ago and is now running. I don't know if she sees this as a graduation from city to county. I know Cheryl Grebe, who sits on the county commission, came from the city commission. And then speaking of Grebe, her District 4 seat will be open. She is not running for re-election. We've got 2 Democrats running. Mary Downey, who is currently she runs Hope Partnership, which seeks to help end homelessness in Osceola County, along with Raphael LeBron, who's a grassroots candidate. And then on the other side, you've got Republicans Donnie Schroyer, who used to sit on the St. Cloud City Commission, who's running against Nellie Hernandez, who was part of a group called the Osceola Action Committee. That's a group, they're just looking for a base of candidates in political office that are just different.
And I love that you guys are keeping an eye on such a granular level on these local races. And of course, the collaborative is putting together a voter guide using all this data, all this information that you and others in the collaborative are putting together. It really does sort of show the value of that kind of, hyper-local attention on races.
Right. And we're also going to be covering things that a lot of people don't think to look at, such as judges, who the rules for them are different. They can't campaign. They can't raise their own money. But we're going to try to touch on each of these in the coming months into these August and November races.
Osceola County has a rapidly growing population as well. What does that mean, I guess, for your job of explaining local issues, and government to voters? It must be quite tricky because you're coming at it from a position where a lot of people are just unaware.
Right, unaware of the issues, unaware of the moving parts and the people involved, and really unaware of what we do at the News-Gazette. So first of all, we have to make that connection and then connect them to, okay, here are your moving parts, here are your movers and shakers, here who's running for office, here are the issues, and here's an overview of these issues and what it would mean to your community as you live here 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the line.
Ken Jackson from the Osceola News-Gazette. We'll put links to some of the News-Gazette's reporting in the show notes. They've been covering the micromobility issue too, including a piece on e-bike safety training in celebration schools. Meantime, a reminder you can support Talking Central Florida by clicking like and subscribe. Listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Talking Central Florida is a production of the News Collaborative of Central Florida with support from the Orlando Sentinel, the Winter Park Voice, the Central Florida Foundation, and Central Florida Public Media, where the show is recorded. We'll be back with a new episode next Wednesday. We hope you'll join us then. Until then, take care.